Could Ryan Grubb be making a return to Seattle?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over at Huskies Wire. Make sure you check out all of our written work. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Lars, there are some very fun rumors flying around right now. So let's talk about it. Ryan Grubb, Washington's former offensive coordinator, who I don't think was ever really officially announced as the offensive coordinator of the Alabama Crimson Tide after Kalen DeBoer decided to take that job, is rumored to be maybe making his way back up to Seattle and is rumored to have an interview as the Seattle Seahawks offensive coordinator. And that could be really fun for a number of reasons. And I know we both have a lot of thoughts on this, but my personal favorite part of this is, maybe if Ryan Grubb gets that job, that points towards the Seahawks maybe taking a quarterback by the name of Michael Penix at 16 overall and getting out of the Geno Smith contract.
Yeah, so here's the thing about Ryan Grubb. It's not. He doesn't have any NFL experience, right? Has never been an NFL assistant head coach in any capacity, even as like a graduate assistant or just quality control guy, whatever you want to say. Neither is Joe Brady. And so Joe Brady had less experience than Ryan Grubb, right? So it's not, as people will say, like, oh, well, why would Mike Macdonald hire Ryan Grubb? It's like, in NFL circles and in college circles, Ryan Grubb is considered one of the best offensive minds, not named Mike Macdonald, Kyle Shanahan. You can throw a couple other guys in that conversation, but Ryan Grubb, despite the national championship, which you could kind of throw a lot of things into that as to why it didn't work out, right? It's still a one touchdown game in the fourth quarter, and you're going against one of the best defenses you've seen all season. If not, actually, probably no, the best defense you've seen all season. Let's be real. But I was going to be nice, but I'm like, no, let's be real. That was without question far away. But even still, Ryan Grubb was in that game, and that's the thing is, when you're looking for an NFL offensive coordinator, you're just looking for a guy who knows how to game plan, right? And what does Ryan Grubb know how to do? We saw it time and time again over the last 2 seasons at Washington. We also saw it at Fresno State, and everywhere he's been. It's kind of funny how Kalen DeBoer has taken the credit for Ryan Grubb in a way, right? Where and it's not a slight to Kalen, right? Because the Indiana offense looked good in 2019, right? When they weren't together. But when they're together, it's really Ryan Grubb that puts Kalen over the top. So if you're Ryan Grubb and you're thinking, okay, well, I have a bunch of contacts that used to be college coaches that are now in the NFL that are in my inner circle that'll vouch for me and give me a good recommendation, why would I at least not take this opportunity to interview? I mean, he interviewed for the Alabama job last year, right? After everybody came back. So for certain, Ryan Grubb is going to take this interview. The question is, do they hire him? I think it would be a fantastic hire, right? Because he's a youngerish, not an old guy, but not a young guy, right? So you're not getting Joe Brady where you got to break him in. Been a long-time offensive coordinator. And what do the Seahawks kind of need? They need a schemer, right? Especially like you need Kyle Shanahan or somebody of that mind. And that's what Ryan Grubb is, right? I'm not saying he's better than Kyle Shanahan, but in terms of an offensive mind, a guy that can game plan and scheme open a defense, in college, is there anyone better? So why not make that jump to the NFL?
No, I agree with you there, where it's not, you don't have to worry about the recruiting aspect of things. And then one thing, like I said a little bit earlier, one thing the Seahawks are really definitely looking to do is explore all their options at quarterback, where Geno Smith's contract is very easy to kind of get rid of following the 23 season. So if they're interested in taking a quarterback in the first round, again, say it's Michael Penix, that would be really easy for them to do and makes it a lot more stomachable where, all right, not only do we have a great offensive coordinator who we think can, scheme things up where we've seen him do it before, right? With a great trio of receivers where now you've got DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith and Jigba, but you've also got a couple of really good running backs in Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, where you have a really nice core there. The offensive line is really good when healthy, maybe add another piece there. But this is all exactly what Ryan Grubb was able to help get the most out of in 2022 and 2023 with Washington. And then it's all about putting the right quarterback in place, whether, maybe you do think it's Geno Smith. That would be really nice. Or if, maybe it's a Michael Penix, or say they go after another quarterback through the draft, maybe earlier or later, take a guy like Michael Pratt at Tulane in the second or third round, where Ryan Grubb is somebody who he's shown he can develop quarterbacks, because not only did we see him do that at Washington, we saw him do that with Jake Haener at Fresno State. Also, former Washington guy. We're making the connections all over the place here today. But I think that would be a really great hire. And then one thing that you and I were talking about a little bit before we press record here is some of the position coaches, where, maybe does that mean Jamarcus Shepard also decides to make the jump to the NFL? Does Scott Huff decide to make the jump to the NFL? Where, we had heard some rumors that the previous coaching staff wasn't all that enthused about making a move to Tuscaloosa. Those were some rumors that we had heard. And who knows where maybe, the staff just makes the move across the water and decides to go work for the Seahawks, which would be really cool to see.
Yeah, and I have to imagine it's just a safe bet here that neither of those two sold their houses yet. Again, it's actually honestly public record, so we could probably look that up at some point. But I'd be surprised, right? Because, when you think a lot of when these coaches make these changes, usually they're going to that new place and then they're either hitting the road or they're hitting the job, they're hitting the ground running in that new job. The families will often stay behind. Jedd Fisch said the same thing where, hey, okay, the wife and the kids are now going back to Arizona to finish up school. And it hasn't really been that long. So all the families are still here, I would have to imagine, right? And if anything, you could make that seamless transition back to the area. And honestly, it kind of makes perfect sense, right? Because if you're Ryan Grubb, your next move is really a head coach or going to the NFL, right? So why not bide your time, go back to where you want to be, which is in the Seattle area, in the state of Washington, be an NFL coordinator you can honestly probably stay there for 4, 5, 6 years and even longer if it hits, because then
things go right. Yeah.
Because that's the thing is if it goes right, but even in the NFL, let's be real. Right now, he has a legitimate track of being 3 years with the Seahawks. I could see him being 1 or 2 years in Alabama, right? Where it's like, okay, the grind of being in college, the recruiting, and then do I want to go be a college head coach? Or why not? We saw Jeff Hafley do it from Boston College, taking the defensive coordinator position with the Green Bay Packers. There's a lot of college coaches that are like, hey, you know what? If I can make good or better money in the NFL, and it's not all about money, but the quality of life, I actually don't have to be out on the road recruiting half the year, 3/4 of the year, and then trying to keep my players that I just coached at practice yesterday to come back tomorrow because, they may or may not be getting offers through fourth and fifth parties, in NIL at other schools. So all those headaches go away when you go to the NFL. That's like all of them, boom, go away. All you're doing is working, and that's what Ryan Grubb loves to do. I remember talking to him last February. He's like, "Oh my God, when I go into my off-season projects and and I divvy up the stuff with the staff, and I go into my thing, it's like a mad scientist, right? And so that all tells me why not do that in the NFL? Like, you don't think Kyle Shanahan's in the offseason cutting up stuff? You don't think Mike McDaniel's living in his office 364 days out of the year except for Christmas? Like Ryan Grubb is that kind of guy. So why not, raise your daughter in Seattle, NFL money, and then when the perfect head coaching job comes open, then you consider that. But we're talking 4 or 5 years down the line, because if you draft a quarterback, to your point, you're buying 3 years automatically.
So I do disagree with the 4 or 5 year point, where let's say things go well, and as an offensive coordinator in the NFL, look at what's going on with Bobby Slowick and Ben Johnson in Houston and in Detroit, respectively, where it took one year for Slowick, 2 years for Ben Johnson to become the hottest names as an NFL head coach, where you don't even need to maybe say, all right, now I need to go take that college route again, where if you do well, and with the personnel that the Seahawks have set up, it could happen for him rather quickly. And then maybe 2 years from now, instead of saying, oh yeah, maybe he takes the Iowa job, like I know something you've talked about, or he takes one of these upper level college jobs. It's, oh wait, no, I don't know, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers need another head coach or something like that, where all of a sudden it opens up so many more alleys for him. And Lars, that's the big breaking news of the day, but there's a whole lot of news that we weren't able to cover that we want to make sure we jump around on. But first, we're going to send a quick message to our good friends over at FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl Sunday to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets, which, by the way, I was in New York for 24 hours, so I actually do have a couple of Super Bowl bets. And here's a fun parlay for you with plus 725 odds. If you're interested, Travis Kelce, anytime touchdown scorer, Deebo Samuel, anytime touchdown scorer, and Rashee Rice, over 67.5 receiving yards. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So, Lars, one of the bigger news of the day, while I was taking my quick 24-hour trip to New York, I was going to say vacation, but it definitely was not. It was a very, very long day. But was Arizona edge rusher Russell Deuce Davis has announced his commitment to Washington. And with that, he becomes yet another member of Arizona's roster. I know we've gone back and forth on, players versus true freshman commits. So just a member of Arizona's roster who has followed Jedd Fisch to Seattle. And he's one of the more intriguing guys that, had entered his name in the transfer portal, where like Isaiah Ward, who I know you and I are both still waiting on to see what his decision is going to be. And when he might announce that, is he's got a whole lot of upside. And the other thing that Davis adds is a veteran presence, where you and I have talked about seniors Voit Tanufi and Zach Durfee, where even Zach Durfee doesn't have a whole lot of snaps under his belt. And what Davis brings is he might even, contend for one of those starting spots over, say, Voit Tanufi, where now you can have Voit play his true role of a rotational edge rusher and, move him inside when you need to. And while Davis can still rush the passer for you really well, but maybe he gets up to, say, 235, 240 pounds by the time the season rolls around, which I know is a big ask because that's 10, 15 pounds for him. But if he can do that and play a little bit stronger against the run, all of a sudden this is a junior who is becoming a really big contributor for you. Wow. And like we said with some of the other guys in the room on previous episodes, will work out behind him in the Lance Holtzclaws, the Maurice Himes, and, Jacob Lanes of the world.
Right. Well, I think it's a situation where you at least want somebody, like if you're Jason Kafusi, right, the new UW defensive line coach, you want somebody from that Arizona roster that you coached previously where you can say, okay, I know what I'll probably get from him, but I don't need I don't need that whole room, right? I need maybe one or two, right? The other one being Isaiah Ward, right? But if you don't get Isaiah Ward, you at least need to get Russell Davis, right? So one of those two had to come. And so I guess with it being Davis, I think to me that says maybe we just want another veteran to kind of shore up the two deeps, and then we're going to turn Jacob Lane, Lance Holtzclaw, Maurice Hunt. We're going to turn all those guys loose, knowing that, again, because right now you can kind of pencil in a two deep, right? And we've kind of done that. But with a new coaching staff and only one player that has to overlap with that coach, it's like, well, everyone's kind of got a fresh start. Maybe Voit doesn't excel as well, or maybe he does, right? And maybe Russell Davis doesn't acclimate himself well to whoever the defensive coordinator. And again, I'm not saying that's the case, right? But I'm just saying that's why the point of what I'm getting at is you get all these guys in the room and let them compete on the field over the next 2 times you're going to get out to practice, which is spring practice, and then again in fall camp, and then you have summer conditioning to kind of get the body right in between. But you want the bodies in the room, and I think getting this veteran is, I think, the key word that you're hitting on, because it's not a discredit to Zach Durfee, but it's like, hey, let's just get one more veteran, because if we're going to have 4 or 5 freshmen, we want 3 or 4 veterans, right? You don't want just one veteran at the top of that list bringing up 5 freshmen, right? Because that's, and if it falls on Zach Durfee and Voit Tanufi, it's like, okay, well, Zach hasn't only played one game at Washington. Voit's been kind of a role player at best. He hasn't been that true consistent starter like Braylon Trice was, or ZTF. So you don't really have that established guy. And to be fair, Russell Davis was kind of in that Voit Tanufi role at Arizona, where he was coming off the bench. He wasn't a starter, but he played every single game. So it's a matter of, okay, we need maybe just one more veteran presence in here just to kind of shore up the room.
So I want to take one of the things that you said there a step further, because you talked about freshmen, especially, where none of the guys outside of Anthony James was still like technically count as freshman eligibility, but 4 of the 5 members of Washington's really good defensive line class have hit the transfer portal or committed elsewhere. And that's so Noah Carter's at Alabama. Ratumana Bulabulavu is in the transfer portal. Keona Wilhite just got crystal balled to UCLA. And so, and then I'm missing one name there. It's Dominic Kirks. It's Dominic Kirks went to Ohio State. So that's 4 out of the 5 guys that you brought in. So you're looking to fill that depth anyways, where when you and I were looking at it from a standpoint of true freshmen, it's all right. You don't need to worry about these guys this year, where like Carter, Wilhite, and Kirk's like, they're all really talented, but you can let them develop. You can give them the red shirt year while the guys in front of you figure everything out. Where now that you don't have that, maybe Jacob Lane takes a step back this year, and Anthony James he still develops. Where as the previous staff was, kind of bouncing him between edge and defensive tackle. So maybe now he sticks purely on the edge, and you just kind of figure that out from there and give him another year to just kind of develop. So in front of that, you can just say, all right, Lance Holtzclaw, Maurice Himes, Russell Davis now. This is going to be the rotation. Then Isaiah Ward, if he ends up coming as well, where this is the rotation now. This is great. We know that we have all these other guys, and some of you as well, for multiple years, but we trust you to go out there and get the job done now as this is. And we're comfortable with, and it, it still sucks to lose somebody, especially like Noah Carter, but you can look at that and say, all right, we feel a whole lot more comfortable with this now. Whereas, a month and a half ago, you and I were talking about, all right, well, does Dominic Kirks have to burn his red shirt and play this year because he's, a high ceiling edge setter right now. But now with bringing veterans like Russell Davis into the room, you don't have to worry about that nearly as much.
Right. Well, the other thing with Davis too is he does have 2 years of eligibility left because he'll be a junior in 24, but then he can be a senior in 25. So I think that's also good to where it's not a 1-year rental, right? Like, we're talking about Sebastian Valdez being basically a 1-year guy. You can get some mercenaries, right? You can take a couple, right? But you do really want most of your transfers to be minimum 2-year guys, preferably 2 to 3 year guys, right? Because you don't want to keep having to go back into it's like, hey, you know what? I should have signed with you out of high school. Now you're at Washington. I'll come join you. Like, I'm a younger guy. I'll develop under you. You don't want to keep going 1 year after at quarterback, especially, right? But, a number of positions. You don't want to just be getting 1 year guy after 1 year guy, because also that means you're not developing the younger players behind him. So that's to our point again, where you have a very talented Lance Holtzclaw who just hasn't gotten as many reps and probably won't get it. He won't be like a starter this season, but he could certainly be a key contributor. And, that's all that really you can ask for, especially what the edge position has come. It's like, it's more about how many missiles can you throw versus just having one consistent battering ram. Because we saw what happened. Braylon Trice got triple teamed a lot this year. So like you could have one elite pass rusher, but he's not going to get a ton of sacks because, well, if they know what's coming, you need to kind of throw 3 or 4 different guys. And now that you have 3 or 4, maybe even 5 different guys in that position, now you're able to throw a number of different looks, and that helps you defensively, and especially when you have a pretty good secondary now.
No, absolutely. And that's something that we definitely want to jump into a little bit. And that, Lars, that was an A1 segue, respect. So let's jump into Peyton Waters and Vincent Holmes. So really big news, because safety, arguably outside of offensive line, is probably the thinnest position on this team before Wednesday. And then we saw 2 former 4-star recruits in Peyton Waters and Vincent Holmes both decide to withdraw their name from the transfer portal. Where do you want to start here? Do you want to start with Holmes or do you want to start with Waters?
Let's start with Holmes only because of the intrigue. And Vincent Holmes, I remember Chuck Morrell, the former now UWC, telling me like he's the next guy up at safety. Now in his Instagram bio, he's listed as a wide receiver. I don't know if that's changed on the roster or what that means, or even if that's just been there for the entire time and I must have missed that. So I'm also kind of curious to see, does him coming back change a position, or does he stay at safety and kind of continue to develop on whoever? Well, I guess John Richardson is the full go secondary coach. So he would develop under John Richardson. And we've seen Arizona have success, with Gunnar Maldonado, a number of safeties over the past few years under Jedd Fisch's coaching staff at Arizona. So if I'm a younger DB, it's not the worst theory to say, okay, let me see what I can do at safety. But also then you look at the receiver position, and he's got great body type to make that work, which is now also why keeping the second guy, going back to the other one, Peyton Waters, is just as critical, right? Because if they do end up both playing safety, now you have two young guys, almost like what you had with Cam Fabiculon and Asa Turner, where, hey, two veteran guys, now we're going to have two younger guys kind of grow together at safety over the next 2 to 3 years, because that's ideally what you'd want if you're Washington under Cam Fabiculon who came back.
Right. So, because right now, I know we've discussed it ad nauseum, where the safety pairing to start will probably be Cam Fabiculon and McElstein. But then the question was everybody behind him, where it was for a while, it was just Diesel Gordon and then somebody, right? So that they're just that was about it, because it was Paul Menke would have been the next option. Paul Menke and Raheem Wright, like that really would have been the next possible option. And there's no slight to either of those guys, but that's not where you want to go, is having a true freshman back there.
Or Caleb Presley, right? Where he was, we kind of heard some rumors. I think, we kind of mentioned that throughout the season, not on the show, because we kind of heard maybe he's transitioning from corner to safety or corner to nickel. And, again, when you're a true freshman, and none of the freshmen were going to play significant or considerable legitimate time this past season. So it wouldn't have been the worst experiment to see Caleb at safety. But then, again, to your point, never played a game at safety, at least in college. So, yeah, basically almost like having Diesel Gordon back there.
No, you're right. So then, with Holmes, if he moves to wide receiver, that would be really interesting, where he played it a lot in high school, is really fast, has just outstanding speed, and under Kevin Cummings, I'm sure he'd develop into a good player. But I just think he fits so much better at safety, because in just cover 3 looks, anything with a single high safety, he can really be exactly what you want back there because of that speed, because of that range, and because of the ball skills that he has, where he still needs to put on weight. And, we'll see kind of what that looks like with him as a tackler, where I think that might be the biggest question where it comes to, all right, do you want to move him to the offensive side, or do you want to leave him there at safety? So I think that's kind of, where that might be coming from. Is it, all right, well, does he want to actually hit people and play safety, or does he want to score touchdowns and play receiver? Because, to each their own. So that's kind of my biggest question there, where the scheme fit is better at safety, but I think his athleticism and body type might fit a little bit better at receiver. So I think they might try him out. And, hey, worst case, look at what happened with Sione Vaki, where he's now taking snaps as a safety and a running back down at the Senior Bowl, where, you can always just try to see how those things play out.
And if you think about yes, I agree that the safety position is technically worse off than the receiver position, but also the receiver position isn't like what, again, high bar to clear coming back from last season, where you brought in Roma Dunze, Jalen Polk, and Jalen McMillan just as that's your first line. Then you still got Giles and everybody else behind, and Jeremy Bernard behind him. And so it's like, okay, when you look at it now, you have Jeremiah Hunter, you have, at least on paper, Giles Jackson, Denzel Boston, and then all the freshmen. So it's like Vincent Holmes is almost kind of in the similar boat where, hey, these guys didn't work with our offense last year. They worked with a really good offensive coordinator, but not with Jedd Fisch. And so now do you give him – at worst comes to worst, spring ball is the best time for this to find out if he can do it or not. Because if you give him 15 practices and it's like by practice 5, he's picking it up and he's maybe wide receiver 2, competing with Jeremiah Hunter, okay.
That'd be crazy, but
no. But I'm saying, like if you try him over there and he just jumps out right away, just kind of ride with it. If he starts struggling, then you kind of maybe say, okay, go back to safety, and then maybe we'll try some. At the last 5 practices in spring ball, we'll kind of play you both ways for the last 2 days or something like that, right? Just to kind of give you an example, and then we'll go into the summer, see if your body type comes back, and then we'll figure it out in the fall, because you're going to play, but maybe where and when can he play the soonest, at which position, and where can he have the best impact, right? Because if he struggles at receiver, then don't force a square peg in a round hole, throw him back at safety. But if safety's not terrible, right? If you have Cam Fabiculon and you have insert whoever McElstein, right? Whoever you want to put over there, and they're holding it down good enough, right? Again, you're going against your own offense, so it's all things considered. But if you feel confident in those two, why not give Vincent Holmes a shot at receiver early on in camp, right? You don't want to wait and say, hey, we're going to start you at safety. Oh, you're kind of sputtering behind Mikel. Maybe we're kind of just trying to go with the veterans. And then now you're trying to go back to receiver and play catch up. It's like, no, just try him at receiver. And then if it doesn't work after the first 5 or 6 practices, put him back on defense to say, hey, we gave it a shot. Let's use you where we know we can use you. And, we try again later.
So I think that it would be best to just leave him at safety for the time being, just because look at what we saw happen at that position this past season, where the depth was just ravished by injuries. Like you look at the USC game in particular, where, Vincent was coming off of his absence for a couple of games. And outside of that, like you had to line up Jabbar Muhammad at safety, and you're taking your best cover corner out because you have to move him somewhere else because you were just that desperate for bodies at the position. Where, now you can say, all right, it's still really young and really inexperienced, but we know we have a lot of bodies in the room that worst case we can rely on. Where, a lot of them are true and redshirt freshmen at this point. When you look at Menke, Raheem Wright, maybe Rashawn Clark finds his way into this mix, assuming he, with his commitment coming soon, and us assuming it might end up being Washington at that point. But with all those guys, there's going to be just as big of a need at that position, and that could be a bigger problem especially when you have some backs and tight ends that can catch the ball.
Tristan Dunn's not in the portal, is he?
Oh well, Tristan Dunn. I always I still think about him in that Husky position too.
Right, but are they going to have the Husky position? Because they haven't necessarily signed any player. I mean, the only one that they did sign was Raheem Wright, where you can say, hey, he kind of fits that nickel safety sort of mold, but better at safety than at nickel, right? And so we don't even know theoretically, right? Are they even going to have now? They're going to have nickel packages, right? But that really became a thing under Jimmy Lake, right? You have to go back to Jimmy Lake to when it wasn't that Washington never had nickel corners. I mean, Greg Ducre was a nickel corner at times. You can go back throughout the years of Husky football. There was always guys that third cornerback spot, but it really became paramount under Jimmy Lake when he brought in that. I forgot what he called it. I
can't remember his term for it, but it's like the best way to say it is just when Elijah Molden was there.
Right, exactly. And so he really made that position, and then Mish Powell took it over, and so on and so forth, right? So that was really a staple of that era of Husky football. Does Jedd Fisch bring it over, or does he say, hey, you know what? We want two really lockdown guys. Yes, we're going to have a safety come down. We know how to play football, but we're not going to make it a true staple of our program right now. I think there's pros and cons to that, right? Because we're going from the Pac-12 or the Pac-2 to the Big Ten times two,
right?
Almost, and so like most of the Big Ten, yes, you have the Ohio States of the world and things like that, but do you think of the Big Ten as a passing offense?
You definitely don't. But
exactly.
Here, so to one thing, just to answer one of your questions there, I wouldn't be surprised if we do see that same sort of 4-2-5 look, because when you look at Arizona's depth chart from last season, they have the star position listed on there, which is the same thing that the Husky is. It's just, different programs have different names. So Johnny Hanson did prefer to have that kind of player on the field. So again, it's just something where we have to wait and see, because there still isn't a name out there, a defensive coordinator. But one thing I did want to say, because I wanted to make sure we talked about Peyton Waters here for a minute or two, is everything you said about Vincent Holmes. If I were to choose between these two guys who prove that they can play two-way at a high level, is that if I was going to ask one of them to move to wide receiver, right now it would be Peyton Waters, where Peyton is still fresh and still coming in, and so many different recruiting services have him listed as a wide receiver still, where I still think he might fit better at safety. But between those two guys, one of them at least has a year of college under his belt. One of them has a year in the defense, already putting that work in. So why not take somebody who's fresh, moldable, and, maybe he finds himself playing both ways as well. But that's not something where, I would say I expect that. But Peyton was a really good receiver in high school. Shout out to Birmingham High School. Pitched there. But, nobody cares. So I just think that's something where he's a little bit fresher, and it's a little bit easier to work with a guy like that, where Peyton's also a really, really good athlete. And you can just say, all right, maybe, one day we're going to try out on offense. One day we're going to try out on defense. And to exactly what you said about Vincent Holmes, let's see where this fits better for you, because we like everything about you. Obviously, they worked really hard to make sure he would withdraw his name from the transfer portal. So now it's, all right, we clearly like everything it is that you have to bring to the table. And especially, since they're recruiting so many other defensive backs, if you look at some of the offers they've handed out for 2025, you look at obviously getting Raheem Wright to commit, maybe still, working on Takario Davis as well. And then Rashawn Clark, who we just talked about a second ago. All of these guys, somebody is going to have to move off that route. Like, I know I just said that you can't have too many bodies, but at a certain point, you have to say, all right, somebody is probably going to be doing something else. And just if we're discussing between those two guys, I think that I would probably prefer that Waters move to the offensive side.
I mean, I can definitely see that. I mean, he's got talent to play it. I just kind of wonder, almost like Vincent Holmes, right? Where, okay, you have a guy with college experience, so he knows how to practice. Why not try and put him on offense and then let Peyton kind of just acclimate himself, get in the program, get in the weight thing. It also kind of plays into, do you take Audric Harris? Because if Audric Harris commits as a transfer, then you don't need a wide receiver, and especially a younger wide receiver, right?
I still think you do.
Well, but I mean, taking that extra number then kind of makes that discussion a little more interesting, I think. And then I think if you kind of just weigh the two, I don't know. I mean, I think Kevin Cummings is the answer to this question, right? Who would you rather have, Peyton Waters? But it's a good discussion to have, and I think the ultimate win for Washington is that both of them ended up coming back, no matter where they play.
Right.
It's a matter of keeping that high-end talent there, because if you're Jedd Fisch and you now have to replace both of them, even if you bring in Harris, now you're trying to bring in 3 more players because you still are losing 2 younger players.
No, I agree with you there. And then, because so to your point about Harris, there still aren't that many scholarship players at the wide receiver position. We're adding, like, that makes it 4 true freshmen at the position, which is tough, but we're already kind of seeing that at like just in other places on this roster where it's all right, we're going to have to let the youth play at some point, like linebacker being one of the examples that we talked about where we're expecting to see a decent amount of Devin Bryant and Jordan Whitney. And we just had that discussion about the edge position where getting a veteran piece to solidify it is nice, but you're going to have to let the younger guys get their reps in at some point. So getting Audric Harris doesn't necessarily change things, where now maybe it's just, all right, we like what Jason Robinson does from a route running perspective, and he picked up the offense really quickly. We're not necessarily going to burn his red shirt, but we're going to throw him out here and there to see what he has. And then maybe in different games, it's all right, now we're going to throw out Justice Williams, see what he can do here and there. And you can still let these guys develop, but you don't necessarily have to worry about burning a year of eligibility with them. And Lars, I feel like that's a great place to wrap this one up. As always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And, just keep it right here on Locked On Huskies, because there's going to be so much more news coming out over the next week or two, with just the ever-evolving world of the transfer portal, the NFL draft, so much. So the best way to make sure that you stay locked in with us here on Locked On Huskies is to make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure that you stay tuned. And again, hit that subscribe button, because it all really does help us out. Just like when you like the video, leave us a comment down below. And if your audio only leaves a 5-star review, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Monday.